I thought you were like, oh, if you're talking in U2, it doesn't make sense to me.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Taste Like Music. Jason, Joe, and Crams are here. Tears for Fears week. They've got a new album out. It just came out yesterday, by the time we're recording this, called The Tipping Point. It's their first album in 18 years. So that makes 7 studio albums total that we will be ranking today. If you are new to the channel, we cover a different artist every week. On our Tuesday video, we rank their studio albums. On Wednesdays, we do top 10 songs. And on Thursday, we have a third list or discussion that is inspired by the artist at hand. So Tears for Fears, a band that I know all of their singles and all of their hits, but I'm not too familiar with the albums going into this week. I actually can't say for certain if I've ever listened to any of them start to finish. It's possible that I've listened to The Hurting and Songs from the Big Chair before, but I'm actually not sure. So mostly this is new for me. Really only know the big hits, and that's it. So how familiar were you guys going into it?
Very, for me. I would assume I'm kind of the resident TFF dude. Knew them all, obviously, other than the one that just came out, and even know the B-sides. Had like copies of the live stuff downloaded on my computer. Big TFF guy, but because they take these big ass breaks, it's hard to like keep them in my mind. But they're just kind of Roland and Curt, kind of like among my favorite pop vocalists and just one of my favorite pop band sounds. So I might tend to overrate some of their material because of just that like up my alley pop sound quality, but yeah, we'll get into that in a minute.
Pretty familiar with Tears for Fears. Really love their 80s stuff. Less familiar with basically in name only the Tears for Fears albums from the 90s when Curt Smith left. And it was just Roland, Elemental, and Raul and the Kings of Spain. But I was a pretty big fan of their comeback album. So pretty familiar. Although not listening to them this week, there's a lot of things that kind of surprised me still. So even though I was familiar, I hadn't done like a really deep dive. So some cool stuff and stuff that I may have overlooked in the past. So fun week for me.
All right. Before we get into the listing, now is a great time to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you're not subscribed, hit the bell for notifications. Let's do it. Who's kicking it off?
Jason hasn't kicked off one in a long time. Let's let him do it.
All right. Number 7, my least favorite Tears for Fears album is The Tipping Point. The new one opens up with No Small Thing, which I like. Thought it was cool. Had a somewhat new sound for them. A lot of acoustic guitar, really ominous build-up. I thought it was catchy. Things go downhill quickly from there, though, starting with the second track, the title track. It's got that rip-off of Themselves that Everybody Wants to Rule the World beat on the drums. The bass line's basically playing the same song as well. Didn't care for it. And then the record never really recovers from there. Thought it sounds good. Vocally, they both sound strong on it. I think it's well engineered, but I don't think it's well produced. Some of the production choices on this are just totally baffling to me. It sounds so much like it was made in that era that we always talk about not liking very much, that turn of the millennium, late 90s, early 2000s sound to it. A lot of like programmed beats, glitchy kind of drum sounds. There's almost dubstep bass on the song Long Time. The songwriting strikes me as pretty lame. On first listen, I kind of figured they were talking about like social issues and things going on in the world, but then reading about it, it said that a lot of the material was about the death of Roland Orzabal's wife. So, I mean, either way, if you're talking about those things, very heavy subject matter, and there should be a lot to dig into, but it feels very empty. It doesn't seem like they're saying much of anything. Please Be Happy struck me as being especially kind of dopey lyric, like talking to someone with depression, just like telling them to cheer up. You can do it. You can be happy. I don't know. Master Plan, I think, is a song that could have been good, but the production is so bland. They have a lot of this like big blandness on a lot of these records where it's like, it sounds big and like it should be interesting, but it just leaves no impact. I didn't like this record very much at all. 2 stars.
I kind of thought that would be at your bottom. And I also kind of have an idea what other albums will be coming up. And you saying big bland, I think that's kind of the same thing you were talking about reviewing the new Wolf Alice album from last year. You tend to prefer the small, quiet, bland stuff. If it's big and bland, you're like, no dice. So I think I can kind of guess what's coming for you. My number 7 is the only Tears for Fear album I don't like. I have it less than 3. Everything else is 3 and up. 2.5 stars. I've got The Seeds of Love, 2.5 stars. And this is kind of when the band started to fall apart. Curt and Roland really at odds. And, you know, how do you follow up songs from a Big Chair, which was just a huge hit, so many big hits off of it, critically acclaimed, commercially successful. And I think they're kind of guilty of just going too many directions with just too many ideas and too big. You get Woman in Chains, which is really big, very sensual, soft rock, very shimmery edges. And it's not to say the production on songs from the Big Chair is nuanced compared to this. It's still big and powerful and robust. But for some reason, for me, it doesn't really work. I don't think they're always great lyricists, but I think the lyrics on the first 2 albums are perfectly good and credible for big pop music. Here, it starts to get a little bit lame, especially with like Bad Man's song. It's kind of a big old mess. A lot of this is just big, ambitious, and overly bloated. And I think the sequencing in this album is really weird. Opening with Woman in Chains and then coming with Bad Man's song right after it. All of them are just way too big. I think Aletta Adams with the vocals is good, but not needed on this, like, at all. Like, I think she's a fine singer. I just don't think it adds anything, any chemistry. It's just not great. I think the production, the engineering is good. Always sounds good. I don't think any of their albums really sound bad, although I would agree with Jason. Some of them have weak production choices on them. I think the title track is okay. You get some of that early Beatles obsession that will really come out on Everyone Loves a Happy Ending on the title track. Or at least you can hear that they have it in them with those like ornate horns and stuff. I think Advice for the Young at Heart is nice, but Standing on the Corner of the Third World is pretty trite and lame. Couldn't get into that. There's a lot of like faux soul on this. Like they're trying to go above and beyond like with these grandiose ideas, and it's not really working for me. It's a little lost and incomplete, and you can feel the direction of the band kind of just going all over the place, and not a whole lot of memorable songs in their entirety for me, but 2.5, and it's a weak 2.5, almost 2 for The Seeds of Love, number 7.
Wow, I didn't expect both of you to be so wrong so quickly. My number 7, I'm actually with Jason. I have the tipping point at the bottom, but I basically disagree with every word he said about it. I think it sounds really good. I think the production is excellent. For all the bands we've listened to, you know, Jethro Tull and Deep Purple and Blue Oyster Cult, all these legacy rock acts that come back with this horrible like Pro Tools sounding like mush, just totally fake. I think it sounds great. I think it sounds kind of like the Doves or like Coldplay kind of stuff. Not always like the best choices as far as, you know, some of that like extra modern elements that kind of leak through, like the, not dubstep, but kind of those electronic sounding little, you know, trifles. But I think other than those choices, it sounds really good. You know, you got the big synths kind of everywhere is, very Tears for Fears like. Plenty of, dramatic orchestration on Please Be Happy, which I think is the best track on the album to me. I really like the lyrics, but these days it's like a wave that's breaking over you, and it's got that lone French horn that comes in. And other than the sound, I think the weak part is there's no like great single here. Like there's no great like standout. I think all these songs are pretty good. I like Long, Long, Long Time, the pulsing synths, the good female backing vocals. But it just doesn't have like every other album has that like big track that's just like, whoa, like fantastic. This sounds good. I think they sound great singing wise. I think the vocals are completely on point, really good from both of them. But it's just, a really late period album from a band that had all these amazing singles, and it's impossible to compare it to that. So I have it at 3.5 stars. And I think it's good. It's fine. It's just not, up to their really, really lofty standards of what they were doing in the 80s.
That's largely what I said. I said it's well engineered and it sounds good, but it wasn't well produced. I think sonically,
then you were like, oh, it sounds like terrible 90s, early 2000s. Didn't you?
The things they are doing sound good. I just don't like what they're doing.
Oh.
Sonically, it's a good sounding record.
I would put it more like 2010, 2015 than.
Okay, let me jump in here. First of all, yes, Jason's right. You did pretty much say I disagree with everything and then agree with everything. Except I'm with Joe. It does not sound like early 2000s to me. It sounds like 2010, 2011, like, hey, remember the 80s? Like, yeah.
Either way, I think it highlights a problem with the band is that they take so much time between records and they don't seem to know like what era they're in ever. Once you get past the 80s, they are just kind of lost in a sea of.
I do agree with that because, like, we'll talk about in a second, but you get to Raoul and you're like, you're 4 years late with this. What are you doing? Like, you're right. You're right.
So that brings me to my number 6, which is Elemental from 1993. Essentially a Roland Orzabal solo record. This is the first one without Curt. And like I just said, it just feels lost. He's going through the split up with Curt, plus the musical landscape changing rapidly in the early 90s. And I don't think this album really asserts itself as anything. It's not like, no, we're Tears for Fears, we're a synth pop band from the 80s, and that's what we're going to be no matter what changes around us. It doesn't do that, but it also doesn't change with the times or try to keep up or take on a heavier sound of any type. It also strips away the jazzy elements that were all over Seeds of Love, but it also doesn't use like all the great players that were on Seeds of Love. I don't know who any of these people are that are playing on this record. Maybe they are bigger names than I realized, but you had some great players on the previous record. This just seems to be standard fare as far as the musicians go. Nothing here is really bad per se. I think it could have been a lot worse, but it's not really good. And like Joe said about Tipping Point, I don't think there's a single standout track on this record. So like I said, I don't think any of it's bad, but at no point during this record was I ever like, oh, that's cool. It just kind of goes by and is what it is. 2.5 stars for Elemental.
My number 6, and I'm up to 3 stars. Got the new record, The Tipping Point, but I'm closer with Joe here. I think it's good. I think it sounds really good. I think it highlights the vocals, but it seems really weird to me that they waited all this time. Roland and Curt get back together and put an album that immediately sounds like they want to break up again because it's like going in different directions. You can tell who had the influence on which songs. What a weird just friendship they've got. Or it's really weird. Like, did they just want to be David Gilmour and Roger Waters in the pop world? It's really bizarre. And this one does sound like I said before and what Joe kind of said, this sounds like it's right out of 2011. Like it's really, it sounds good, but it still doesn't sound like they know what they want to do in 2022. I think it starts off immediately is with an acoustic song that is unlike any other Tears for Fears song you've ever heard. And I think it's good. And then they don't do it again in the album, maybe until kind of the closer kind of bookends with that sound a little bit. And that song kind of has like this middle ground of being like that big mainstream wannabe indie folk sound, like the Lumineers mixed with like a little bit of Simon and Garfunkel. And then the next track, you get like the title track, which is big and expansive and kind of reminiscent of their early sound. It sounds like a 2011 dream pop band who's influenced by Tears for Fears, kind of. And it works a little bit for me. I like Long, Long, Long Time. It's got a cool like 80s adult contemporary vibe to me. I do think there are two really good songs on here. Break the Man, I think is really cool. It's got this cool, big, heavy kind of dance beat on it. Actually, just missed my list. And it's got that big Alex Lifeson just guitar chord in it, really wide open. And I wish the whole album was like this. I would really dig this album if it was just like upbeat and, you know, like modernized 80s dance pop kind of thing. My Demons is kind of cool too. I think it's just like a big soft sell Depeche Mode kind of nod. But like I said, the album's very segregated between like songs and directions and styles. Curt once versus Roland, and it just pulls you all over the place. And I think the problem on this album is the slower stuff. River of Mercy and Please Be Happy do nothing for me. I think Master Plan is cool. And then I think it closes all right, kind of bookending it, like I said, with Stay. So I think there's a lot of highs and lows on this. But it just baffles me that we get this comeback album that just sounds like they're breaking up again and just don't know what they want to do. Like, well, what's the purpose of waiting from 2004 to do this? And I mean, Jason's right. Like, I think the problem with what keeps them from being like an ultimate great artistic band is they never come out with these statements. It feels like everything is just compromised in the ideas of what these albums want to be, instead of just being like, here's what we're doing, for better or for worse. Everything just seems so over tinkered with, like, well, we should do it a little bit like this, and then someone's in the ear being like, we don't want it to be too much like this, and then it's like, oh, you have a point, like, and it's like, and I also love the Beatles, but we are an 80s synth band, so it's just kind of like just, you need to just focus a little bit more, and all of these albums could be better. But I still like this album and everyone else. So tipping point number 6, 3 stars.
Apparently they did break up during the making of it. Curt left like halfway through and then came back to finish it up.
And it sounds like it. It's just weird.
I didn't get that at all, but who knows? My number 6 is going to be the last comeback album. Everybody Loves a Happy Ending. What? Don't give me that face. If you only included the first 5 songs, it would be like 4.5 stars probably, because it just kicks off with a bang. Everybody Loves a Happy Ending. So McCartney and Lennon sounding, just purely. I mean, that's kind of the problem, though. It's so close to like Penny Lane, and then there's a Rocky Raccoon section. Like, you can pick out like what they're thinking about when you're listening to it. That being said, though, it is really, really catchy, and they do a really great job of sort of taking the sound and changing it enough to not get sued. And it sounds great. Nice to hear some joy in pop music, especially when this came out in like 2004. It definitely stuck out. Call Me Mellow is really close to The Laws. There she goes. Like, it's like, but it sounds great. So you forgive the obvious trespasses. And then same with Who Killed Tangerine. It's basically the Abbey Road suite. But that's all right. Like, it sounds great. Like, these are all songs that just sound exactly like other songs. And then it kind of falls off, though, for me. Like, when they don't try and do that, it kind of like, well, these songs are okay, but like I'm just not feeling it quite as much as those early ones that are just really great, like just wonderful sounding. They use a whole bunch of orchestration and everything else. So I don't know. It's just, this one always feels so top heavy to me that I will rarely, if ever, listen to the whole thing through. I hear those 5 songs. I'm like, all right, good enough. So I have it at 3.5 stars, but those are some killer cuts there at the beginning. But a lot of the Orzabal ones, kind of towards the end, are just meh.
My number 5 is Raul and the Kings of Spain. I think the rock is pushed a little more forward here. It's like, Cram's exactly right. It's like, oh, we should be doing like a grunge record or something. It's not a grunge record. It still sounds like Tears for Fears, but it's clear that they were like, oh, people are playing with a lot more distortion now. So they turn that up. Sorry, Don't Drink the Water. Both of those tracks have some pretty heavy guitar on it. There's some really cool slide guitar on Falling Down. Gail Ann Dorsey plays bass on the whole record, which is awesome. She's Lenny Kravitz and David Bowie's bass player, and she's a fantastic bass player. I do think this is slightly better than Elemental, but I still don't think the songs are exceptional. I think a lot of the songwriting is pretty middling. I do think, there's at least some muscle to the songs here, and I can focus on the band and listen to Gail and Dorsey play bass during the whole record. And basically that's what I focus on, because I think that's the most interesting thing happening. Sketches of Pain, I think, is a pretty good ballad, even though it starts out sounding a lot like Dust in the Wind. I also like the title track. I think Falling Down's pretty cool. I definitely think it's, better than the 2 I have below it. A step up, 3 stars for Raul.
That is also my number 5, Raul and the Kings of Spain. And I agree with a lot of what Jason had to say. The bass really sticks out. It's a meatier record. Drums are more plowing through, guitars, richer and heavier. I think they're still reaching for these big ideas. And I don't know if a lot of their ideas communicate that well, or his ideas in the writing. I know the album's supposed to be like sort of about like this big journey, like heritage.com style journey through like his Spanish heritage. But at the end of the day, I'm not really sure what he's saying about it, or like what emotion he's portraying with this. But the playing is pleasant enough and the pop instincts are good enough for me to not really mind. Heavier, it kind of has a cool contrast with a little bit more of that grunge 90s influence, but he's still got that like buttery angelic voice, which I love. So it's kind of got a cool contrast, and the band is a lot more lively. Things are less calculated, far less synths. Synths are almost completely gone in times here. And even though his voice is really angelic, there's some songs where he's trying to be a little bit too rough, and it doesn't quite work for me. But I really do like Sorry. I do think the second half in general of this album is a lot stronger than the first half. I think it takes a while to get going, but when you get to Sorry, and you get Don't Drink the Water, Me and My Big Ideas, I think those all work pretty well. And I don't think outside of my top 3 albums, they're ever really blowing me away with their songwriting. But to me personally, I like the style and the sound of the band almost always, and I love the vocals. So to me, I can really enjoy these albums without being blown away. Like, to me, this is my easy listening, is like putting on this or the album I'm going to talk about after. You know what I mean? Like, it's just soundtrack living to me. Like, I just think it just sounds good. I don't have to concentrate it on too much. I don't have to analyze it. It's a little bit of sweet spots of a lot of styles I like right in there, and it just works for me. It doesn't blow me away. I only got it at 3 stars. I think it's good, not great. Number 5, Raul and the Kings of Spain.
Yeah, I'm very much with you on that, Cramser, and Raul is my number 5 as well. And like, I really enjoyed it while I was listening to it, but I have no desire to place it higher than 3.5 stars. Like, there's nothing really in this album that's like screaming at me, make me 4 stars, put me up there with the 4-star albums from 95, 96, 95 when this came out. And I don't know why exactly. Like, it's very pleasant to listen to. I like almost all these songs. I think it starts off great with Raul and the King of Spain, Falling Down, Secrets, God's Mistake. It doesn't really sound like the 80s stuff. All the pretty much all the synths are gone. A lot more guitar, a lot more reverb. And I love his voice. Like, I could listen to him just sing anything all day. You don't even really need Curt there, because I think Orzabal is really, the star, the focus point. But there's just, it kind of flows through you and then out, and then it's like, well, that's it. Like it's a good experience where you're listening to it. I think Sorry is a really good song. Cool, like bluesy descending riff. In Orzabal's voice, I like it because he can go up the falsetto. He does like the strong and masculine stuff really well as well. And it's like much prettier than like the standard 90s alt rockers that were kind of around the same time, the grunge stuff. But again, it's just like nothing's really sticking to me that says I want to love this album. So 3.5 stars. It's good. It's just not like an essential album. So
it's like watching an episode of like Everybody Loves Raymond. It's like, I'm enjoying this, and someone comes in and is like, you mind turning that off for a second? You're like, yeah, no problem.
All right, my number 4 is The Seeds of Love. People on the Discord predicting our winners were pegging me for this one because obvious Beatles influence, especially on the title track. But I don't know. This is a weird record. I don't really understand what they were going for on this. They totally abandoned their sound that was working for them. Just throw their entire identity out the window for this record, for very middle of the road pop. Like, where did all the emphasis on like strong rhythms go? Where did all the synth sounds go? Even the hooks are gone in favor of pleasant melodies that don't really leave a mark. Orzabal is apparently the one that was really pushing for the move away from machinery and wanted to go towards live instrumentation. You do have a ton of really great players on this record: Robbie McIntosh, Pino Palladino, Phil Collins, Simon Phillips, like big names. But I don't know that it amounts to a whole lot. There is some cool playing on it, and you can just kind of focus on the instruments and listen to what they're doing, and it's pretty cool, I guess. A lot of like jazzy flourishes on a lot of these tracks, but it just, I don't know. It just makes no sense why they made this record after Songs from the Big Chair. There's also a real problem that I have that I don't know exactly how to describe, but it's a very specific sound of backing vocals that I really don't like. I wish there was a word for it. Maybe we can coin a term for it with some people in the comments, but this record has it. XTC's Orange and Lemons has it. That's Why God Made the Radio by the Beach Boys has it. It's this like overly professional, smooth sounding background vocal. I don't know what it is, if the way the voices are aligned or if it's like a reverb or an EQ thing, but I just really don't like it. It makes everything that uses that sound super lame to me. And it's all over this record. I don't know. Just feels and sounds like a totally different band that I'm not very interested in after like 2 really cool records to start their career. I don't know. I don't really get it, but I do really like Woman in Chains, the opening track, a lot. I think it's a really well put together track. And I also do like the very Beatlesy title track, Sowing the Seeds of Love. That is the by far catchiest song on the record. So those are pretty cool. And like I said, everything else is pleasant, but just nothing really pulls me in after those 2 songs. So 3 stars for me. Okay.
My number 4, and pretty similar critique I have of this one. It can almost be switched with Raoul. I've got Elemental. And I think the reason why I have it above is it's just got a couple more songs that stand out to me. And I think it starts off well with the first 3 songs, title track and Cold and Break It Down Again. Get a little bit more hipper sound here, a little bit bassier, a little groovier. It's very clean, very big. I think Cold is really cool. It has a nice tempo and a really cool sound. I love Bring It Down Again, even though I think those like horn piano sounds sound pretty weak and a little cheesy, but I think it's just a really well-written pop song. And I feel like Maroon 5 almost just completely lifted that chorus and She Will Be Loved, or at least the pre-chorus of it. And I think the one thing that this album does really well, it's the highlight of the album, plays to its strength, is I think Roland just sounds terrific on this album and kind of just showing off at times. Like he does the lower powerful stuff, like the masculine stuff Joe was talking about, and he gets those falsettos in there. And his mid-level between those two is great as well. I also kind of like how you go from the grand pop power of Break It Down Again to the chilled sensual like Mr. Pessimist, which is just, to me, Roland being like, I can do both of these incredibly well. I thought Dog's a Best Friend's Dog is just a really stupid title and a stupid song in general. Didn't like that. Again, the songs are kind of reaching and a little over the top, and I think the message kind of gets lost. But I think at the heart, they're just good, easy, fun, uncomplicated, easy listening pop songs that fits my style. I don't think Gas Giants belongs on here. It isn't experimental enough to be the experimental part of the album. We don't really need it, to be honest. I like the Brian Wilson nod towards the end, so I kind of like how it ends with that and Good Night Song. So I think it's a good, very easily accessible pop album with a couple good highlights for me with the last two songs and the first three. So 3 stars for me, still just at 3, which is good, but we'll jump after this quite elemental number 4.
Okay, that is also my number 4, but I like it more than you, although you had many nice things to say about it. Starts off really great, elemental, definitely, you get that more aggressive guitar rock sound. And it's definitely, a huge move away from the jazzy sort of like gospel almost influence on Sowing the Seeds of Love or The Seeds of Love. But, it's definitely more British alternative kind of rock sounding. The production is handled by Alan Griffiths, and then the co-producer, Tim Palmer, I believe did Pearl Jam's 10. So like you kind of have like that more anthemic, almost American style coming in a little bit as well. Cold is great, cool guitar textures, love the slide guitar on it. And I love Dog's A Best Friend's Dog. Terrible title for a track, but he does this like rapid fire singing on it. I think that's really cool, shows off just how versatile he is. Gas Giants feels out of place, agree with that. But it kind of comes back with Brian Wilson said, Good Night Song. And, it's basically like fully, more than any other album, just Roland Orzabal solo album. He does all the instruments basically. And he gets to show off. I think people take for granted, he does the guitar parts on Everybody Wants to Rule the World and Shout, and like these really cool guitar licks and solos and stuff. And I think he's an underrated player. And this is kind of him just showing off all the things he can do in a slightly modernized sound. I think it would have been silly for him to go back to 80s pop or kind of stay in the jazz world after The Seeds of Love. So I like what he does here. I like the sort of modern for the time playing and everything. So I have it at 4 stars, probably like on most of their songs. Some of them run a little too long. Like they have a penchant for pushing things like 5 and 6 minutes that could probably be 4 minutes long. But I think all in all, a pretty good album and one that I had not heard before and enjoyed very much.
Right. My number 3 is Everybody Loves a Happy Ending. Back to some Beatles worship on this record in a big way. So I don't know, is it Curt Smith that really does the Beatle-y stuff? Because the last time we really heard that was on Seeds of Love. He's back on this one and boom, Beatles are back. I know Cram loves this record. I remember him talking about it a lot when it came out. He recommended it to James on Recommendations on that series. I like this style of writing a lot more than what Roland was doing on his like solo albums that were actually Tears for Fears records. I think the hooks are way better on this in that there are hooks, but I don't dig the production too much. It sounds really kind of flat and dull, not really warm. It sounds really digital to me, at least. Maybe I'm sure someone's going to be like, he recorded it all to tape. I don't know. It doesn't sound that way to me at all. It sounds very Pro Toolsy. So I would prefer, like, if you're going to go for the Beatles, just go for it, man. Go for the 60s, 70s sound. It sounds way too modern. Even like a 80s Jeff Lynne style sound would work a lot better. I don't know. Call Me Mellow, I think, is a really good song, probably the catchiest. I have written, Joe said it sounds like There She Goes, which it does. I have written that it's a combination of She's So High and There She Goes. Very, very 90s pop rock vibes, but it's really catchy, and I think it's a pretty good song. They go really big on Secret World with a huge string section. The list of players on it is just like 50 people. And it was arranged by Paul Buckmaster. There's also a bunch of brass on the song, so it's really, really like over the top. I don't know. I think this record has probably their best songs since Songs from the Big Chair. I think it's, you know, really polished sounding. It's well arranged, but something in the production is missing for it to like have a wow factor. I don't think the songs, you know, really come across as well as they could. So I think it's a good record. 3.5 stars, barely. It was almost just a 3, but I pushed it up.
That is my number 3. I've got it at 4.5. Everybody Loves a Happy Ending. I think it's really great. Simply because the songs are all pretty well written and all pretty memorable. But again, and I kind of see what Jason's saying, it's missing something in the production to kind of make it stick out. And I also still feel like it's 8 years too late. Like if this would have been a huge hit had it come out in the mid 90s when everyone was kind of like rejuvenating the flower power 60s sunny kind of pop stuff, it would have been gigantic probably. They just have time travel issues, except in the 80s. But the title track is awesome. So Beatles, from the sound of the little breakdown. Joe said it perfectly. It's like, all right, section 1 is Penny Lane, then it's Rocky Raccoon, then we'll do back to Penny Lane. It's very smart. Closest Thing to Heaven is great. His falsetto is terrific on it. I just love the sunny 60s psych pop vibes on it. Call Me Mellow is good. Sighs of Sorrow. I think the big difference here, the songs all communicate really well and don't feel lost. Like this one, you know, pretty much the division between these 3 and the 4 below for me is, you know exactly what they're going for on my top 3 albums. This one, they love the Beatles. That's all you need to know. Boom. And it works. I love Who Killed Tangerine. It's really epic. A lot of these songs are epic, like Secret World. Quiet Ones is a little weak and out of place. That's one of the only mishaps for me on this album. But Who You Are is really cool, and I really dig The Devil. I love the ornate arrangements. I think Lady Bird is lovely. And I think the album is really cool as a grower, because at first it sounds like, oh, they're back to writing really good Beatles sounding big chorus, big catchy songs. But I think as the more you listen to it, the more nuance kind of comes out, which is cool. Just a lot of really good songs. I like the direction and I like the focus. 4.5 for me. Everybody Loves a Happy Ending.
That is a strong recommendation. 4.5 stars. Whew. All right, I'm just going to keep moving back in time here. I'm going with The Seas of Love from 89. And yeah, it's a big break from what they were doing on Songs from the Big Chair. Lots of internal squabbling between the two. And so I guess they just decided we're going to completely change things up. We're going to get all real players. We're going to make it as real sounding as possible. And I think they do a great job with that. I think 489, it sounds great. It sounds very real. I think the production's very good. I think the choices on all the songs are really good. I really like all the players, all the instrumental stuff. I think the problem with this, especially coming after The Big Chair, is like all these songs are really long, and like they're almost not even pop songs anymore. Like Woman in Chains, with Aletta Adams doing a lot of the vocals, I think is great. I love her. I love her on this. I think it's a cool kind of duet partner, bouncing off of each other. But like, it's not really a pop song at all. Bad Man song's 8.5 minutes. It's not a pop song. Even Sowing the Seeds of Love, like there's a pop song in there, but it's 6 minutes and 20 seconds long. Like they're taking things a little too far with their maximalist kind of jazz pop on this. And it always just kind of struck me as like a little too much. Like these songs are just running on so long when they could be, 2 minutes shorter. And I think they could be compact, like really good pop songs, instead of sort of like these spacey, airy jam sessions with all this great playing, but not like a ton of hooks on these songs. The exception, of course, being Sowing the Seeds of Love, which is the only song that Curt Smith has a writing credit on. So he's got to be the Beatles guy. He's got to be the hooks and the melodies sort of come first guy. Because the rest of it, I mean, I like all of these songs. I think they're all good. Year of the Knife is really good. Advice for the Young at Heart, real pretty stuff. I think it sounds great. I think the playing's great. The vocals are great. Everything's great, except the songwriting is like a obvious step down on the hooks and the poppiness. And I don't know how you do that when you just came out with an album that had like 3 of the greatest pop singles of all time. And then you go to this where it's like, okay, let's not do any of that. So I think it shows off that they're very talented individuals and they know how to make an album, but it's just missing those pop gems they were so good at. So I have it at 4 stars, but it's kind of like a middling 4 stars. It's not, it always just like leaves me wanting more from this. Like I want it to be more, I want to like it more, but I never just get like all the way into it.
All right. So as I suspected, we've got the first 2 records in the top 2, all 3 of us. I would imagine that I am probably spoiling a trifecta. My number 2 is Songs from the Big Chair. I think it mostly picks up where The Hurting left off. Similar production. You still have Chris Hughes producing. And I think the production is even bigger and more grand than it was on The Hurting. Shout, such a well-constructed song. It builds and goes through all these different sections and introduces new elements at exactly the right moments. It's a pretty long song. I think it's around 6.5 minutes. And just where like it might start to get boring, something else comes in. I love the backing vocals from Sandy McClellan. That is awesome. I love the sax that comes in. There's a great guitar solo. And it just never gets boring. It builds and builds. Everybody Wants to Rule the World and Head Over Heels, I think, are both perfect pop songs with immaculate production. They both sound great. It blew my mind to see that Mother's Talk was actually the lead single from this record, which is a cool song, but I think you've got 3 obvious smash hits here. Can't believe that you would put that out first, but I Believe is a beautiful track, but it feels like a little bit of a lull in the context of the record, especially opening side 2, I think is a weird move. This record has better production than the first record, some absolute bangers, but I feel like the deep cuts aren't quite as good. And that was something that really surprised me with The Hurting, was how good and consistent all of the tracks were. I also think the sequencing on this record's a little awkward, and the broken Head Over Heels / broken thing is I don't know, that's kind of weird how that operates in the record. I think the 2 records are really neck and neck. I think they're both really good, but I feel like The Hurting is maybe a more complete album experience. So 4 stars for Songs from the Big Chair.
My number 2 is The Hurting. Songs from the Big Chair is the best Tears for Fears album. There's no doubt about it, unless Joe disagrees. But I also kind of see what Jason is saying about The Hurting as like a complete statement. Songs from the Big Chair has more of that all-star cast kind of feel. But I really like the deep cuts from Songs from a Big Chair. All the songs on The Hurting are really good too. And there's also kind of a less mainstream, more art pop feel to it. It's a little bit more maniacal, which I think you get obviously with Mad World, which is super cool. I just love this, that they have this like sound that is so on the nose, what people were like craving for around this time in the early 80s. They nail the sound, but they're not just like a sellout commercial pop band. Like there's real artistry to this pop music, which I absolutely love. 4.5 stars for me for The Hurting. First 3 songs are great, terrific sound. It's clean, it's pretty, it's big, robust, and wide open. All of those things, even more on Songs from the Big Chair, which is even more impressive. But yeah, I think there's just this really cool creativeness to it that says, you know, as a debut, we're not just a pop band. And I think the songs are super catchy. I love Suffer the Children as this great upbeat melody, counteractive to what the song's about. Love the children choir singing on it. I love how epic and huge they can sound without being obnoxious. Change is awesome. The middle section in that song rules. The playing is so underrated on these first 2 albums. You know, I think the start of The Breakdown is a terrific closer. Album has just tremendous flow to it. Each half, I don't know which half is better. Yeah, it's just terrific. The Prisoner rules. Pale Shelter, super cool. I don't know what keeps it from 5 stars for me, but it's not quite there. I think it sounds tremendous. It's got like it's bright and icy at the same time, which is super cool. It's like danceable, but it's not like super groovy. It's just got a really cool thing going for it. Yeah, 4.5 stars. I don't think we ever mentioned it for like best debuts, but it's got to be up there too for just nailing that new wave pop sound and killing it. The Hurting, number 2. Let's see what Joe goes with.
Well, it looks like Cramser's the one breaking the trifecta, because my number 2 is going to be Songs from the Big Chair. Yes, surprise, surprise. And I do love Songs from the Big Chair as my runner-up in 85, but it doesn't get to 5 stars for me. And I never really knew why, but now I kind of have figured it out. It has to do with The Hurting. As far as Songs from the Big Chair goes, you know, it's bigger, it's more perfect. Like some of the production on this, it's so good. Like it completely transcends, I think, the 80s and how good, especially the 3 pop songs, Shout, Everybody Wants to Rule the World, and Head Over Heels, are just completely timeless with the way they sound. They have elements like of the 80s, but at no point does it sound like it's like, oh, you know, has to be in the 80s. Like you have to enjoy 80s new wave synth pop to enjoy it. Like it's just completely timeless compositions there. And I mean, everything else is good. I Believe is really kind of empty, jazzy, really reminded me of like Talk Talk almost, like post rock. Like it really just pretty, you know, takes its time, a little slightly experimental. And Mother's Talk, maybe the most 80s sounding one. It's got those big like metallic synths, like the big 80s pounding drums. But again, I mean, it's a great song. The singing is fantastic. It's complex. Like, there's all these different parts and elements. They're way beyond like a typical sort of new wave synth pop band. Like it's not like Duran Duran or Howard Jones or something where, I mean, it's good. Like, you know, they write good, pretty songs, but these just feel so much more complex and like put together in comparison. And I like Broken. I don't know. It always kind of does weird me out the way it goes from Broken to Head Over Heels to Broken. But Broken itself, like I love, like that sick kind of like guitar and bass workout is fantastic. So nothing wrong with that. If anything, I would have just put the Broken reprise with Broken and made one song. But, you know, small minor quibbles. Listen's great as well. Everything about this is great. I don't know why I can't get to 5 stars though. It's like there's not enough there, or there's just not enough variation or experimentation, like that kind of a couple weirder tracks, other than I Believe. But I don't know. There's just always felt something like not quite there for me. And especially after listening to The Hurting this time, I was like, okay, this has everything I want. Like this album is what, you know, it has those like little extra songs and textures and experimentation that's missing from Songs from the Big Chair. And I do think the primal like scream therapy concept that they do on The Hurting ties it together a little bit better than Songs from the Big Chair. Songs from the Big Chair maybe sounds like a little discombobulated as far as like the track flow and everything like that. Maybe missing that central element to tie it together, but still phenomenal. 4.5 stars. Outside of maybe Purple Rain, I can't really think of any 80s albums with a better kind of array of singles. So it's great. Yeah. Heartbeat City also would be up there, but this is up there. Top 3 or 4 probably.
All right, number 1 for me is The Hurting. Really strong start to Tears for Fears week for me. Didn't really know how consistent it would be with songs from the Big Chairs, kind of always singled out as their classic album. And I expected this record to be good, but I expected it to be like really on the shoulders of the singles. But I found it to be really consistent. And like Joe mentioned, they have a little bit of a concept running through the record about child abuse and depression and trauma. I was really impressed with it as a debut. Like, where did this band come from? Like, it seems fully formed, like the idea is, concise and focused. The record went gold within 3 weeks of release. And I think they have a fairly unique identity. It is synth pop, but within synth pop, I don't think too many other bands really sound like them. They have a really unique emphasis on rhythm. It's probably like Depeche Mode, I think would be the closest comparison, but I think their music is a little warmer, probably a bit more advanced than Depeche Mode, at least at the time. Like if you look at A Broken Frame, which came out the year before The Hurting, I think I like A Broken Frame. It's a cool record, but it's much more primitive, I think, than the Hurting. If you're looking at it on a timeline. I love the vocals on both of the early albums. I love when they like almost belt. It's like this guttural bellowing that they do that's really cool. You can hear it on Ideas as Opiates and on the title track. Maybe it's because I'm a little bit of a newbie when it comes to Tears for Fears. I cannot tell them apart. I never know who's singing it. To me, it's like a Rick Ocasek, Ben Orr type of situation where like I can tell them apart easily now that I know, but for a long time, I had no idea that there was a second singer in the Cars, or like a Lane Staley, Jerry Cantrell situation where their voices just like blend all the time. So it's like, who is this? I think, and I could be wrong, Roland Orzabal has the deeper voice, but his upper register starts to sound a whole lot like Curt Smith to me. Great production. Just sounds so modern for its time in '83. I think the songs are structured really well. All the tracks build really nicely. And for a synth band, it's a very dynamic record. A lot of, things build and get louder or drop out for the bridge and get quieter. There's a flow to everything. They also do incorporate guitars and sax and more acoustic type instruments. Watch Me Bleed is more like a full rock band track with live drums. There's great hooks all over the record. I think it's a well-sequenced record. I was impressed with this one. It's real close to 4.5 stars, but I'm sticking at 4.
My number 1 is Songs from the Big Chair. You guys spoke really well of it. I do fundamentally disagree with something Joe said. I think there's a lot of dynamic on this and a lot of variety. Look at the 3 singles. They all sound completely different from one another. Like, it's remarkable to me. Shout is really dark. Everybody wants to rule the world is really like profound. And then Head Over Heels is just this giant like piano ballad. It's really cool. The production on it is just so complex for a pop group, and the songs are just so complex, and I love it. And anyone that like kind of discredits 80s pop as being just like cheesy commercial crap, it's like, look at this. Like, this is the thinking man's pop group right here. They're like mad scientists at times. It's super cool. Disagree with Jason on the deep cuts. I think they're great. Mother's Talk, Listen, Working Hour, I believe, is my least favorite song on the album, but I don't think it hurts it at all. And I never really was bothered by Broken, Head Over Heels, Broken Replies at all. I think it like kind of is a cool reminder that they are players as well, and you know, have a little bit of rock tendencies. Broken is just so awesome. I've always wanted to, like, if we ever do a highlight reel of our channel, that would be a great song to do it to. Just like it's just so cool sounding, and it's just such a great jam. Always loved it. I don't have much more to add, but I just love how, to me, this is like 80s pop. There are probably 80s pop albums I like a little bit more than this, even though I have it at 5 stars. Like, I might like Let's Dance a little bit more. It's hard to say. But to me, like, between, you know, the icy new wave parts of Shout, and then you get, you know, Head Over Heels is this huge ballad, and then you get that sax on the Working Hour with like these, you know, sensual 80s vibes to it. It's just got a little bit of everything. So I think it's fantastic. Singing is on. The complexity of the pop songwriting is fantastic. I love what Jason had to say about Shout, about having all these perfectly placed moments to keep you interested throughout. Really good review of that. So I honestly have no problem with you guys picking The Hurting. It's super cool, and in some ways works better than Songs from the Big Chair. But, you know, for listening to 8 songs on this and never being bored for 1 second and being impressed with almost every second of it, I can't have it not number one. I can't have it less than 5 stars. I think it's a perfect pop record. So there you have it. A really enjoyable week for me, obviously, and really enjoyable discussion.
Indeed, I'd love to talk about my first place album. If, you know, I thought maybe you were trying to end the video.
I did try, and I succeeded. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Number 30. All right, my number 1 is gonna be The Hurting, and I've just been sleeping on this album this whole time. I know I've listened to it before, but man, when I listened to it this week, I couldn't believe how good it sounded and how much I liked it. So whatever I've been doing in '83, a year I complained about not having enough like great albums sometimes, this could be my new number 1, because I have it at 5 stars, and it is, I loved every second of this album. It's so cool right off the bat with The Hurting. You can tell it's different than like the other new wave bands. Like that first couple of minutes or couple seconds of the title track, I almost think it's like Rush's like The Big Money or something. Like, it's really kind of like interesting 80s guitars, not what I was expecting, I guess, from, you know, a new wave synth pop, whatever kind of band they are. And it just, there's so much variety and diversity on this album. You definitely kind of like have those elements of, you know, Depeche Mode and like slight undercurrents of that. But I just think it's so much better as far as like instrumentation goes. Curt Smith, his bass work on Start of the Breakdown is unbelievable. Like I think he's a completely underappreciated part. His bass work is great on all these songs. I really like Ideas as Opiates, as this like sparse kind of like really laid back 80s, reminds me of Talk Talk and like post rock. There's this discordant guitar and like these squeals of sax that come in, and it's just like, I know I've heard this before, but like, how did I miss all this interesting stuff that was going on the first time? It just feels like so beyond what everyone else was doing. Mad World might be the worst track on the whole album, other than maybe The Prisoner. Like, I think it's a great song still, but it's really dark and downbeat. And despite like the lyrical matter, like it's all about how terrible Curt Smith's and Roland Orzabal's childhoods were, basically, and the Primal Scream therapy. A lot of the music is like really kind of positive and like shimmering and upbeat, which is very interesting, the way they balance those two things. Memories Fade, great. Another one where there's like hints of jazz that come in, sax, like this kind of spacey synth. The singing's great on all of these. It's like got this kind of gothic flavor to it. There's plenty of moments of like great grand pop, but there's also, I think, plenty of like sparse, like empty moments too. And I think just the way they pull both of those off with, you know, equal aplomb, really impressive. Suffer the Children, terrible subject matter, really great 80s pop jam. Children's choir that comes in is fantastic. The Hurting, Pale Shelter, great like pop singles that have like these really kind of dark lyrics to them. And it's not quite as like bright and shiny as songs from the Big Chair, but really just catchy, awesome songs. And I think it's just like a perfect debut, like Jason said, just fully formed, incredible players, great singers. I think the songs are great. So really cool, really, really slept on this album because it is just kind of blew my mind this week. So glad to find something new. It's always great, especially because, I kind of had songs from the Big Chair penciled in. Like, there's no way something's going to be better than this. But here we go. 5 stars. Number 1.
Good review. I'm sorry I interrupted before. I just thought you were kind of talking about a little when you were talking about songs from Big Chair, but very good review. And I always love when debut albums are so impressive with complexity like this one. Like Jason said, like, how is this your first album? It sounds like you built up to this. Like different from like, New York Doll's first album is great because it's like, we are a bar band. We captured that. This is like, it's like going into like a college as, a biology major and your professor just being like, you already know all this. What the hell? How the hell do you do? How are you doing this? So cool.
So final thoughts on Tears for Fears. For me, I think the first 2 records are really, really good. Everything after that is massively disappointing to me. And it's such a weird change of direction. Like the first 2, they have such a clear identity of who they were. And then they just totally turn into a different band after that and never go back. And I like that first band that they were a lot better.
I kind of agree with you. I mean, I love the first 2, really liked Happy Ending. And then I like the other stuff just because I like Roland and I like the sound. But it does seem like a missed opportunity for them to be like one of the all-time great bands, not just pop acts of the 80s, like with just a little bit. I almost want to live in an alternate universe to see what album should have come after Songs from a Big Chair. Like if you said there is another album better than Songs from a Big Chair or The Hurting, like what the hell would that even sound like from Tears for Fears? It would sound amazing, probably.
I get where you guys are coming from for this, but by 1989, like that ship had well sailed. Like there was no going back. They just didn't crank out. Like a lot of these other bands are cranking out albums every year. Like you can kind of do that where it's a similar sound, but I think the infighting kind of got to them and sort of it delayed this stuff enough that they were like, okay, it's 1989. We can't redo like 80s pop. We got to try something new. And then it all fell apart. But I kind of liked all of them more than I thought, especially the solo, basically Roland Orzabal stuff. So I had a great time this week, learned a lot, discovered a new classic. So,
all right. Let us know what you think of Tears for Fears, how you rank their records. Drop it in the comments below. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you've not yet done so, hit the bell for notifications. You can also find a bunch of links in the video description: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, our website, merch. And if you'd like to support the channel financially, you can subscribe to our Patreon. 3 different tiers. Check it out. Like I said, links in the description. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.